Tragic love story. The aspirations of colonized and enslaved peoples are everywhere the same. Their lot, too, is the same. Patrice Emery Lumumba. Did humans create Ahura Mazda, or did God create humans? The answer matters only to pathetic creatures. The oldest part of Jerusalem is a mirror depicting the central delusion of our times. Dividing quarters by religion to strictly preserve invalid boundaries and laws creates worlds that are so close and yet so far apart from each other. From here, radical stands that stem from religious and secular fallacies have closed, for everyone, the sense of humor and common sense corridors and opened the golden gate of egocentrism and intolerance. Tiptoeing across all demarcating lines in Old Jerusalem crushes the logic of what billions of souls have been kneeling to. Poverty triggers confusion and the loss of mental activity. Hardship paralyzes the ability to sort out presumptions and illusions. Labeling the other holds a controversial history for vulnerable populations. Social disfigurement makes emotions stimulus disappear into shadow and motivates cyclinism until the poor's compassion towards other poor people gradually declines into apathy. The Dejabon River is just another museum full of chefs d'oeuvres made by the poor with other poor people's blood. Losers of the birth lottery, teleported into the land of hope and glory in which they can be anything they want to be, generally hold to their initial nauseating social construct and spiritual phantasm. It is indeed disheartening that the white people in Butte, Montana, in the U.S., think that they are better off than the brownies in Potosi, Bolivia. The gangs of the oppressed are sadistically seizing every opportunity on the poverty tourism sector to turn millions of people's excruciating and humiliating socioeconomic and health realities into a pile of cash. The universal peccancy of hominids is full of vectors pointing in every possible direction. Their predominance of disgraceful dots in society's development backstory attests to moral decay's persistence. The whimsical collective conscience grants leniency to those who are accomplices of nefarious maneuvers greater than petty theft. Thus, just as through certain drugs or religion make humans stupid and insane, men are rendered dull and stolid by capitalistic delusions. All over Sadir City in Baghdad, Iraq, misery has an unusual aroma and tenor, more so than in Strawberry Mansion, Philadelphia, USA. A ridiculous amount of energy might build an appreciable improvement in the stock of the shabby ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Solidarity will remain inert or full of bungling performances until thoughts attaching prime importance to humans are nurtured. Inequality is proclaimed, a buttress against social collapse by the marginalized and the lunatic fringe of the wealth. Murmurs of equality do not capture much of the public's attention, as the ones harmed by injustice are consistently and diligently tearing each other apart. In medieval Europe, much of the coercive power of the aristocracy weakened. The attitudes inherited from the feudal order did not substantially shift. An insurrection is far from evidence of vibrant, intelligent culture amongst the oppressed. When former colonies gained the control of means to which they had not previously had access, their freshly molded ruling class awarded themselves the entitlement of a lifestyle underwritten by an extended set of variations of human bondage. Inunch scholars smirks nullify the effects, indicating the injustice is the chief culprit of poverty. In a pocket of anti-capitalism resistance, the elite imposes flimsy restrictions on moneyers while crushing proletariat ideals. The poor are aware of this social and political inequality, but perceive their position as natural. You may also notice that after making a little bit of money, people at the bottom of the social and political pyramid become lighthearted, joyous, and inclined to dance and sing. A small amount of money has great power to make a chaste person lascivious, or a shy individual confident by merely deforming a particular viewpoint of the life cycle. Such is the beautiful secret of capitalism, though, of course, it is concealed under a pile of fallacies. Exquisitiveness, poverty, malice, and coldness are all multifaceted. The savage civilizations are said to be hostile to justice, even as they are ignorant of it. It is doubtful that this forged consideration may not one day be in high request, especially when we consider its broad utility for conglomerates and the innumerable poverty which anger brings upon the poor. The poor are infatuated with the modern dominant commerce and trade creeds. Generally, the ones at the bottom know little of the social, commerce, and trade, and political arrangement of Poge. They also don't believe that the free market can do anything but keep them poor. There is no more significant cause of death than despair. Where narcissism and selfishness are the most esteemed traits, and a strong hand is admired, the themes of debate have no ingredient other than that of obedience and politics. After dissecting the perception of distributive justice and procedural justice and the relationship with the machine of the 21st century despotic regimes, one can deduce that there aren't many dictators left. Dictatorship has been replaced by immature Caesarism, a system in which each of the dominators and those suffocated stand to their role and rank and respect the script. Allegiance and moral delinquency are related to spiritualist fantasies and ethnic or class membership. The vassals would simply refuse to admit the failure of their lords, whom they blindly support to the grave. Alas, the devotion to folly takes precedence over the collective national interest of social progress. Often, when one of the vassals is out of arguments that he is there to convince with the persistence of his vis-a-vis, insults become the preferred weapon of destabilization. Why is something that builds up humans through commerce and trade now destroying humanity? George Washington Carver. Capitalism made humanity into daydreamers and gilded the worst in a human until the truth all but vanished. It is locked in a fatal embrace between social benefit and the ecosystem's demise, activism and radicalism, and aspirations and trauma. Maddening condescension has generated more alms for the poor than all the virtues together. Serfs and slaves fought their way to self-determination from landowners. Lumpen intellectuals endorse moneyers Boris Advars and the impoverished materialism enthuse third-world adolescents and are subsidized by the rich states. The modern world's prominent melody, chanted out of the mystical corridor to the cornucopia, depicts social welfare as a burden on solely the rich. Poverty's physical and psychological brutality has yet to put to the test our bonds of loyalty to spiritual creeds. Humanity has devised multi-layer fantasies to deal with social injustices. The concoctions of religious ruses and scientific methods has become more refined with impressive cerebral ornaments. Defied lupin intellectuals, politicians, and clergymen dazzle us with quixotic solutions to social plights. The public pulls out revolvers and begins blasting away self-professed liberators and protectors who accidentally reveal their clay feet. Why has no civilization protested against the general state of intellectualism and spirituality at the same time? The global double standard critics do not adequately point out the source of hypocrisy and prejudice. Why are we miserable? Our default mode is to ruminate excessively on autobiographical stories. Graphs are becoming insidious acts of transgression. We are probably no longer convinced by the tales of old narratives that portrayed social injustices as natural disasters. Humanity's self-portraits depict widespread isolation and despair. We feel trapped in an empty frame. Humankind's emotions have been chopped off, and everything we would usually use to make contact with the outside world has been taken away. Capitalism is plunging us into an unsettling world. Behind the facade of competition and capitalism's anthem, except for a few of us, we are all vulnerable and abandoned. Some minds have captured the global restlessness, angst-ridden mood. The global computer network is providing a variety of information and makes it difficult to deny that the entire world is in the midst of a crisis. Social injustice inquiries or dialogue about ethical, social constructs of power and privilege is onerous. The challenge lies in getting closer to what it is and how it is perceived by those who are experiencing it. Esotericism of mainstream economics has made socioeconomic inquiry, interpretation, and explanation mainly of hermeneutic nature. In the study of people in the shittiest parts of the globe, There is little or no attention to make sense of misery and despair regarding the meaning of people who experience it. The crux of anthropologic and sociological canvassers' aims lies in looking for the generalizability of findings to apply to a larger group of people. Western scholastic arrogance and Eastern dedication to a superhuman controlling power freeze a turn of consciousness when dealing with dilapidated parts of the world. Demystifying causes of social injustices is the noblest endeavor that one can undertake, yet is the most deserted turf as well. Creativity transcends cultural boundaries, not metaphorically, but in real terms. We are wasting time and energy attempting to disentangle capitalism as a misnomer when capitalism, the monster, is shoveling baloney down our throats. The current patterns of life are far different from the English social and political context of the Victorian world. Genetically, we have not changed much. Epigenetically, that is another story. Capitalism is long past its prime. The kernel of capitalism lies in mass productivity-based human despair, not mass creativity or sustainability. The barbaric commerce and trade arrangement still is the most dynamic method for coercion of the will and common senses asphyxiation, which has no relevance in recent existence. While it has maintained a durable mortifying linearity for the common standard of living, recent financial and media instruments have made it possible for culprits to grow their wealth and spheres of influence exponentially. Nothing is more remarkable than the anxiety of a genius. Alas, the story of capitalism produces only greater heat than anger. It seems that the inevitable fate of man is to never attain complete freedom. Princes everywhere tend to despotism, and the people to servitude. Jean-Paul Marat. Life is about living by taking refuge in the study of the hidden secrets of nature, not by means of books. After devoting the best part of an existence, diving into the worst part of what different civilizations have to offer, and in the company of shrewd beings and judicious dons, I arrived at this melancholic conclusion. The hearts of superhumans are set either on narcissistic schemes or on the accumulation of wealth by any and all means. The more one drinks from the immense fount of knowledge, the more painfully thirst increases. One has to deny the very existence of the cure for the irresistible longing to become possessed, at least once in our lifetime, by compassion. In the same way, opiates are not remedies for improving the general conditions of mediocre minds, or preventing the ascent of hatred to privileged brains. Countless questions are not understood, but are thought to be passably solved. 18th century sages deplored regimes' interference, enabled by wrong-headed dogmas. It was an asymptote. The Edict of Nantes recognized the freedom of consciousness and not the freedom of expression. Codified beliefs and rituals were a way of neutralizing ideas thought to be a potential threat to state tyranny and the Holy Order. Cash payments renovated the colonist-colonate bond. Feudalism, then mercantilism, elicited the psychosomatic social afflictions necessary for proliferating capitalistic views. The voyagers went from being social phenomenon records, guardians, and tomb raiders to being involved in the buying, relocating, and selling of human beings. Echoes from Industrial Revolution graveyards stimulate fantasies. The Calvinists' doctrine of predestination delicately insinuated that fortune is a sign of virtue. Their contentious perception of wealth progressively eroded the stigma which the influential Catholic Church had attached to extortion. Wealth accumulation is accompanied by a great deal of variation in the consolidation of power. Moneyers percolate through despicable concepts under the auspices of politicians and lupin intellectuals. Laissez-faire are credited for plummeting the influence of monarchs over the society, commerce, and trade, and politics which set up capitalism's footing. A series of British parliamentary exploits, the Enclosure Acts, passed between 1750 and 1860, removed the prior rights of local people in rural areas and forced them out. The lands seized by these acts were then consolidated and given to politically connected farmers. France was the first country in Europe to have this ideological and rhetorical justification of the free market. In other parts of the Western world, the maneuvers had different ballads with the same results of pushing the astute men, women, and children into the firm grip of moneyers. Global cohesion is perpetually wrapped in a blanket of apocryphal stories, for better or for worse. The proliferation of non-native concepts separates communities from their natural equilibrium. The seeds of faith in capitalism were sown deep within its mystified historical progression. The apostles of laissez-faire have repeatedly denied or dismissed the maxim contradictions in theory and praxis, and tried to nudge us out of that zone. Adam Smith's laissez-faire approach meant that there was no need for a chaperone in commerce and trade. Bernard Mandeville had faith in adequately channel laissez-faire efforts by office-bearers. The nearer we surge into the 18th century, the more we convince ourselves of their vehemence in rebuking discriminating birthrights that determine individual and group bargaining positions. On the contrary, they had the temerity to believe that fighting for a rule by the one-person principle and everything that it entails was a quintessentially scholarly thing to do. They nodded to the brutal marionettes to harmonize moneyers' rapacity and demolish the power of local guides. They were the best and brightest pro-capitalism contingent who came up with their erudite-sounding arguments to justify why moneyers were entitled to do what they wanted. Today, laissez-faire embroiders the 18th century public goods optimism over the untrampled pursuit of individual gain. If you cannot resist the temptation of being an asshole, capitalism bills acedia as an essential noble trait for grandeur. This is more of an old social arrangement to enhance the bond among moneyers than the outcome of society's genuine sentiment to the greatest good for the greatest number. The intrinsic worth of the labor of the poor is set by captains of industries who are assisted by lumpen intellectuals, from which all the comforts of their lives arise. The capitalistic arrangement is built on something that is no longer true. Population's linear growth, which is at the core of productivity, a capitalism prophecy, is a delusion. Old misconceptions have immeasurably widened the psychological gap between generations. Gone are the days where the army of illiterates sought secure employment and required clear and concise orders. The polished manualism, which still exists in its pure form in a place like the Dominican Republic, is fast losing legitimacy in the eyes and hearts of growing legions of the distorted. The savvy working class is unmoved by the laissez-faire banderoles. The embodiment of the status quo's repudiation lies in the drift towards laissez-faire. Collective anxiety casts doubt over the perception of an organic demarcation between individuals, as well as the have-it-all nations and the have-craps. Regimes are having difficulties conducting business as public institutions by upholding nonsensical rituals and ghettoizing the masses' civic rights. Governments are hard-pressed to morph into private enterprises, which entail lining equable the pockets of shareholders, its citizens. Moneyers and policymakers should be in the dying need for a new compelling argument to substantiate their assertions of capitalism as the paragime to a better society, and yet they do not. Critical examination of the possibilities for a fresh approach has made little headway. No concrete proposal of how capitalism's sins would be overcome exists to be examined. In the absence of a realistic alternative trajectory, we are left with no other choice than embracing enlightened disruption and letting the implosion happen on its own so the new can merge. Except that it is an arduous path up the hill. Wicked humans cannot help themselves from attempting to tilt fate in their favor. Most children cannot bear to see animals getting hurt. As we get older, we come to terms with traumatic nature's harmony. There is some obscure nostalgia in a stray cat cornering and tormenting a mouse for a long hour instead of butchering it. Is the cat honing its hunting skills or an act of malicious intent? Complex questions have humbling answers. Letting nature take its course makes the predator-prey setting seem pleasant. The rule of no interference has also been an excuse for bluestocking to rest and watch messy human synchronization unfold. Even well-fed cats leave a trail of smashed corpses for their owners to deal with. It is, quite frankly, how these intemperate marauders seduce humans. In places overrun with mice and rats, having a predator around keeps down the population of pests, which in turn tampers down clashes for resources amongst their kind. A poor man is like a foreigner in his own country. Ali ibn Abi Talib. Senseless melodies are the most captivating of all. Daydreaming ceases to be the symptom of anger and becomes the chronic absence of humanism when oppression and humiliation are applied to aspirations with equal force. Every year, offspring of the best embezzlers and the most virile pour from the third world across the vast sea to see the better world. The poorest of the bunch leave their native countries and wonderlands to land with the hope of returning one day with an eagerly coveted cure for poverty, a load of cash. They take the Western world to represent everything good about the earth, and Europe as the mother of the whole world, vastly superior to them through their courage, ambition, and mental strength of its inhabitants. It makes sense. Europe subdued civilizations and enslaved other continents for centuries. The number of those who try to live behind persecution and precarious livelihood by embarking on a perilous journey across the ocean and cultures is insignificant compared to the mass added every year to their home country's pile of destitute. Citizens of rich nations' hideous attitudes toward new immigrants reflect their paranoia about their prosperity's ferry, soon to be overturned by the incoming poor. This naive nightmare is most unreasonable in itself, and is born out of, amongst other things, the testimonies which are given by the army of illiterate newcomers themselves about what went wrong on their lands. Immigration cannot solve the problem of poverty. Wealthy nations are incessantly purging out all poor immigrants in an attempt at salvaging the purity of the national bloodline and preventing the ascent of other cultures set to be woven into the fabric of mainstream society. How to help developing nations help themselves? Migration regrets and cultural unease incited people to return to their nightmare's point of origin. The betterment of living standards requires a set of conditions, including specifically the ability to independently participate or engage in the current mode of debate of commerce and trade, a legal framework promoting commerce and physical infrastructure allowing the circulation of goods on a large scale. Many of these conditions do not currently exist in many third world countries, although there is plenty of labor. The few who immigrate back without handcuffs have no experience in or are armed with an irrelevant understanding of Western commerce and trade trickeries. With shiny badges and their air of liberators, they land and straightaway get a prime seat amongst the oppressor gangs. The Southern Hemisphere suffers from an excess of poor people and defective social net structures. Social remedies indicate that princes of economics rely on the firm conviction that poverty depends on the strength of character and the will of an individual. As undernourishment and imprisonment in a closed cell shatter warriors' bravery, so prolonged poverty's agony and the embarrassment that comes with will morph a characteristic creature into a skunk. Moral philosophers undertake to prescribe an adequate remedy for every disease of the mind. In the 20th century Bible on commerce and trade, denationalization and deregulation are the premises for socioeconomic comfort. Lupin intellectuals sanction rescripts in order not to doubt whether marketing the transfer of public domains to cliques is superior medicine for a nation jammed by collective anger and sorrow compared to the virtues derived from social dialogue and critical analysis of the status quo. This is the main assumption of a rational man, a person who is primarily motivated by money and simple reward, and hence whose behavior is predictable. Everything has been narrowed down to the logic of individual choice, under the notion that nothing on earth is enough to be shared with everybody, and humans are, by nature, lazy. Privatization is a highly praised method of curing social ailments modestly insinuated on one side of the hemisphere. When it comes to the other side of the hemisphere, this suggestion supersedes all other remedies. Harsh AIDS conditionally recklessly forces the same medicine down the shittiest countries' throats. After giving all the boasted state-run disencumbraries features a fair trial, to no one's dismay, they are of little practical use for the poor. A lack of modern capital is a significant incumbrance in a developing country. One needs a lot of it to ride on the privatization wild horse. By the corruption of language, many other corruptions begin. Andre de Jesus Maria y Jose Belo Lopez. A journey is not determined by devotion to a sin. The seed which was in the fruit must be placed in the earth to generate a new natural cycle of life. When a little tree is grafted to the parent tree, The fruit is that of the scion which has been inserted into the parent tree. Preconception's rudimentary assemblage dignifies that relative values of life. Words are to be heard not with the ears only, but also with the brain, to debunk extensively abused lexemes. The prominence of a style's fruitness over a horse sense test suggests that new perspectives are too challenging to convey undressed. Prudence, while seeking to observe and to interpretate meanings into context, is regarded as more severe than contemptibly timid, and the institutions responsible for the conduct of academic cavaliers are warned or driven away by social and financial ostracism. Exceptionalism is like the pillar of the gods. The false sense of preeminence makes people fall in love with the shadows of their minds. The reverberation of their vain thoughts is perceived as prius of their destiny, though it has no substantial existence apart from their folly. The same goes for creeds brightened by prejudices which induce recklessness and cold-heartedness during the investigation of social, commerce and trade, and political incidences that are contemporaneous with each other. The fantastic schemes of mass manipulation are locked in a university's safe deposit box. Capitalism's popularity, or other social and political constructs as tolerance, relies on the foolish and arrogant. In parts of the world where there was no horse, Uhlans were thought to be monsters, half men and half beasts. Traditions that are naturally devoid of institutionalized prejudice get a supply of it out of their Western-trained heroes and the Bible and Koran thumper who distills absurdities into fragrant beliefs. Commerce and trade scrimmages have centered around saving and spending as if the plea for dialogue on wealth distribution is nonsense. I have to say that present-day wealth distribution's heart-to-heart jingles are out of date. The world acts as if the discourse on surplus definitions and portions boundaries has long been resolved, or that it is not yet time to revisit its premise. Social sedation is a consequence of capitalist concerted efforts to mislabel and reclassify human rights and merits. Of capitalism's offenses, the misapprehension of profit is the grossest, while the tampering of entrepreneur connotation and definition is the subtlest. Herbert Spencer's theory, the survival of the fittest, has the same dose of evil viciousness as Darwin's biological natural selection. The axiom has become the slogan of the oppressors and the oppressed and established Spencer's position as a bona fide capitalism barrister. What happened since is a phantasmagoria of delusions and injustice. Once again, the exploiters and policymakers ganged up on the laborers. Somehow, somewhere, the distinction between profit and surplus became extremely fuzzy. We have now forgotten that economics was spat out of an archaic concept of social layers that maintains the most people are just inferior creatures. Racists of the first hour have creatively wrought it. After having good test scores and being trained to memorize a bunch of facts, thoughts, and excitements, academic gurus lost sense of reality. Nowadays, no nation seriously considers the idea of the linear distribution of wealth, even in the face of evidence that poverty is generally transmitted to the offspring, except in those circumstances associated with wars. The free market claim of guaranteeing a fair exchange between active and passive members of an enterprise is not directly contested. The wage system is not altered in the slightest by the transferal of private capitalism to state capitalism, yet the wage system is the mark of exploitation. Eric Kurt Musam. The story of capitalism is like the journey of one of the Earth's most water-wasteful demanding plants, the tomato. Initially, the conquistador found and picked a green fruit plant. With the sun and different terrains, green turned into red. Human greed has turned bloody red. The inertia of academics' conducts, spiritual rituals, and money or sadism are the crucial spices for creating a catastrophe. There is vacillating correlation between skin pigmentation and astuteness, albeit there is a huge gap in the level of comfort and necessities available in between two worlds in which one assesses leadership in terms of competition and the other views it as natural selection. English Victorian convention has locked human creativity and humanity's destruction in the same bottle. It has facilitated humans attaining the best dreams and made humanity's worst nightmares come true. What good is a joyride on a paved road from nowhere to nowhere? The idea that education is the top most important factor in the development of a nation or the betterment of an individual's standard of living is a lie. The presumption that education is immensely essential for a country and that it dramatically changes ways of thinking is not true. Education only influenced the collective way of thinking about the robber's way of amassing wealth and glory. The truth is that education does not help. Alternatively, shall I say, the education makes one a good slave unless it is a means of participation, engagement, or involvement in an enterprise. Doesn't the whole world lie open before every man, woman, and child, just as the air is accessible to birds everywhere? Does the rain fall equally on the just and the unjust, donjou and self-enslaved? The correct answer to both questions is hell no. Since the dawn of time, humankind has hastened to the terrestrial paradise. We go through different gates. Only a few find the one where the sweetest odors are borne towards them in the air because they inherited the right key. When the rain begins to fall, the same small group pulls out their gold umbrellas, which they also inherited. Whoever does elude his or her fate with any of the current social, commerce, and trade and political constructs is not human, but a beast. One could not but sympathize with the acquiescent and anecdotal treatise on capitalism's merits, which was a tribute to the maniacs for their obsession over amassing a fortune and for their wickedness. The Industrial Revolution repainted with fallacies the notion of labor meriting minimal resources for survival and made the Western world embrace the maxim of laissez-faire. Supporting the free market meant condemning laziness and protecting civil liberty. When moneyers reached the place to which common sense deserted the global discourses and economics, having chanced to be elected umpire between social arrangements, the poor, alive or dead, became commercial commodities. Serendipity is a delicate harmony. Our roots haunt powerless hallucinations and powerful verdicts. Distributive justice is said to accommodate laziness. This fallacy causes free marketers today to whitewash capitalism past. How can one smile without stifling the goodness of old tears? The rich are like fungus on the forehead, microscopic parasites living off our sweat. There is no doubt that labor is a commodity. We have come to deny knowledge is as meaningful as money and land, and limit its power to circumstantial cases. Should or could the correct social transformation come through another blood-splattered uprising of the poor and the disenfranchised? No. Financial crisis outbreaks are inevitable. Poverty pandemics are optional. Applying psychological insights into economic subplots demonstrates the inherent fluidity of values, which makes shoppers malleable and at the mercy of moneyers' greed. All of this has far-reaching implications for our understanding the true essence of the 21st century, in general, and commerce and trade in particular. If you want to lose your faith, make friends with a priest. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff. How has capitalism become the most adopted form of social, commerce and trade, and political arrangement? The primary factor rests upon the belief that commerce and trade flourish only in the face of clashes and antagonism between moneyers. Valid reasoning from shadowing an axiom stream permits deceit to fructify in ordinary folks' minds. The vagueness of the terms economy and economics does nothing to deter people from using them all the time, as if these terms' domain applicability are without boundaries. The ambiguity results from a misreading of the nature of the beast. Abstract concepts give space for control, puffery, trickery, and indoctrination. Economics, as social science, has gathered immense power over public policy debates and the human psyche. Neoclassical scavengers pretend to scrutinize phenomena, and the hows and whys things change over time and space. In reality, these explorations focus merely on padlock sequences and the tail end of commerce. The progress towards a proper dismemberment of economic life is being held back because of the teaching of archaic theoretical tenets. This model of investigation caricatures the truth. Economists keep refurbishing the notion that poverty is fundamentally a moral failing, and a cornucopia of luxury food and amenities is proof of divinity approval. Outsiders would likely be aghast by the supercilious narcissism and huddly phantasm of the sterile scientific institutions of economics. Capitalism, the last man standing, world domination success is not solely based on power or ideology, but on the foresight of capitalists to choose the right lupin intellectuals at the right time and place. Capitalism's sheepdogs, firm conviction in reconstructing identities and social nothingness using variables and fixed-point theorems, poses an enormous problem for docile states, just as for rich countries. The Berlin Wall physically and ideologically divided the city for more than 2 decades. When the concrete barrier did collapse, the weird triumph of good over evil crushed Eastern Germans' privileges and simple lives. The neoclassical apostles' unwillingness to take a high risk to achieve for less than enlightenment has made them caretakers of the bitter status quo. Any deduction of legitimacy is contingent upon the cogency of the shreds of evidence. Any induction validity depends on the saneness of assumptions. To put it simply, garbage in, garbage out. Developed economies have used their central banks to persuade private banks and other financial institutions to activate market bubbles. Far too many countries on the road to the free market have found themselves mired in corruption, mismanagement, graft, and political turmoil. The collective consciousness's distress is due to the contamination of knowledge channels from sewer overflow, especially in third world, and academia is failing to provide protection from the beautifully packaged cerebral bullshit. And so the result of several years of everybody Shakiriism, other than slaughtering people, is for everybody to stand around and stare blankly at each other. Lao Shi. The world would have been a murkier place if it was not for the steadfast philosophers and militants who had a sense of right from wrong. They dared to speculate that we were animals, not only blacks, but every human species. They felt apprehensive about the environmental impact of their contemporaries' obsession with wealth and how to amass it. They were fed up with the exploitative arrangement and attempted to break capitalism's spell. Their efforts were in vain. During colonization, Aboriginal sweat and hard work became profit, but the privileges it entails is applied to only Caucasians. Our collective wisdom has yet to find a crack in what is perceived as an insurmountable immoral wall. Scores of countries with low-grade common-sense dysplasia have taken upon themselves to try and substitute their neoliberal regime of market solutions with other forms of socially biased truths and false prophecies. There is a glut of social speculation on damaged logic. Several anecdotes to injustice are based on the belief that poverty depends on the character and the will of an individual. At every junction in which the dominant feature is widespread cohesion, the principle is unquestionably true for robbers, rapists, and impostors. For other ways of livelihood, this is blasphemy. The mainstream conception of human behavior, the economic man, does not take into account instinct or habit formation. Mutineer skepticism leads them to question the deliberate misinterpretation of the social agent's reactions and capitalism's supremacy. A choice between a prospect or gamble scenario obviates the nature of being human and highlights economists' hallucinations. In a society in which Machiavellian methods for getting rich or tightening social order is regarded as assisting in the betterment of the only surviving species of the genus Homo, or a contribution to the Union, any real social justice experiment is doomed. Economics is a serial liar in fantastic's domain. As long as patriotism supersedes reflection and ideology rules instead of critical thinking, glory and misfortune is called wealth and poverty. It is the symbol of a pointless debate. It doesn't come as a surprise to anyone that capitalism is a dysfunctional system, except that it has a psychological contract that no one wants to break. By the end of the 20th century, every social, commerce and trade, and political construct underwent more than a rhinoplasty, in a desperate effort to escape responsibility. A global system underlying the extremely unequal distribution of wealth and power has kept the profane views of the labor class and hierarchical arrangements between commerce and trade actors the same. Conspiracy rules and success myths do work. Every existing doctrine compresses the ambiance of the love affair with the untamable disillusions. Thanks to capitalism, as the story goes, poor white women and children were recognized as humans. Somehow, everyone else also found their way through the golden age of self-enslavement and into the human centipede as efficient slaves. Le roi est mort, vive le roi.